We are live.
Well, good afternoon, Corporation Committee. Welcome to week 2 of the 2022 budget session. We have 3 bills in front of us this afternoon to get through. First up is House Bill 76, brought by our own Representative Duncan.
Can we take roll?
I suppose we could take roll. Sure, Barb, if you'd call the roll.
Representative Blackburn, he's excused. Representative Burt.
Here.
Representative Clausen. Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Ayer. Representative LeBeau. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Chairman Swanitzer. Thank you.
Now we're at that order of business of House Bill 76, single office real estate broker licensing requirements. Welcome, Representative Duncan. Floor is
Thank you,
yours.
Mr. Chairman. Representative Duncan for House Bill 76. This bill simply clarifies the intent of the original 2017 legislation where a company can operate 3 businesses. However, a sole proprietor isn't required to have 3 separate licenses unless they operate an additional brick and mortar. The current commissioner has sent $300 invoices to sole proprietors. With the passage of this bill, the commission will refund those that already paid who paid in fear of losing their license, hence the effective date immediately. And I do have an amendment. You all received it. The only thing we did is on page 2, lines 7 through 10. We added a resident responsible broker operating a single office as a sole proprietor shall not be required to acquire an additional license. So just so I can explain the amendment, we're just cleaning that part up. It just takes out a single office and changes proprietor to proprietorship. And instead of additional license, it says additional company license. And that's it. I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Representative Duncan? Seeing none yet. Welcome, Ms. Urbicate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Urbicate with the Wyoming Realtors, and we are in complete support of this bill and the amendment. The amendment simply clarifies it. Sole proprietor was not used elsewhere in the definitions, and it was sole proprietorship. So we wanted to stay consistent. We feel that this was one of those unintended consequence issues from the 2017 language, and we appreciate your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Urbicate and the Realtors? Not seeing any yet. Ms. Zish, welcome to Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rebecca Zish. I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming Real Estate Commission. With this, the 2017 bill, the language that was passed does indicate that the sole proprietorships also do need to have a company license. Some stats for you on that is we went forth in 2021 and all new companies that got all new sole proprietorships in that year got their licenses. There were a total of 6. In 2022, we have already licensed 27 in compliance with the law, and there are 101 that have not been licensed. We do have some outstanding applications. We paused licensure in light of this bill as soon as it was brought to our attention. There are a total of 134 sole proprietorships that this affects, which out of 750 companies, that is roughly 17% of licensees affected as far as companies are concerned. If you look at it as far as licensees, since the companies are held by the responsible brokers, there are about 715 responsible brokers. So it's about 19% of those that we regulate that are affected by this. We charge the same amount for the sole proprietorships as we do for any other company. And in regards to Representatives Duncan's comment about refunds, we have actually looked into that and investigated that. There will be no refunds issued, but there may be some creative financing for those that got licensed depending on the changes of this, although we do submit that we are properly enforcing the law currently by requiring the sole proprietorships to have a license. So those monies were appropriately collected. So I would stand for any questions.
I do like when an agency says we'll do some creative financing to a legislative committee. but this is an appropriations and we're friendly people. So I guess my question foremost is that there's no fiscal note that says there is no fiscal or personnel impact, but I'm not sure if you're not, I mean, the bill passed 3 years ago, there would be an expected revenue income that's no longer going to be coming in. Is that not correct? Or can you
That
explain
is
why there's no fiscal impact?
Happily, Mr. Chairman. So because previous administrations prior to me did not collect this money and it was not accounted for in the prior years or biennium, it was not counted towards our revenue. And since we were just implementing this at the beginning of it, it was not a number that we had anticipated in our revenue. So we were looking at it at that viewpoint, that it's kind of a zero-sum game if this bill passes, because we were not anticipating those funds anyway.
So you're maintaining, you're operating within the law now, but the last administration of the Real Estate Commission wasn't charging this. But I don't want to say they weren't acting within the law, then you probably don't want to say that either.
They were
okay.
applying their interpretation of the statute in light of their interpretation.
That's fair. But you have a law degree, correct?
I do.
I like it. Representative Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, the realtors were here in 2007, and the intent of the statute and the legislation was not to impose this fee. So it was a difference in interpretation with new administration. So that's why it was never collected. That's why this has quickly come to light, is because that was never the intention of the original legislation in 17.
Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should have looked this up, but I didn't. Is there somewhere in statute where resident responsible broker is defined?
Mrs. Ish, do you know that off the top of your head? Go ahead.
It should be in 33, I believe it is 28101.
Can you
Would
give
have
me the
the
short version
definitions.
of it?
The responsible brokers are essentially within a real estate agency. There is the top dog. So there's one responsible broker only. So they're in charge of anyone that is under them, and they can have associate brokers and salespeople under them. But they are essentially the person that is primarily obligated for the company and for all of the people under them.
Thank you.
Further questions for the Real Estate Commission? Seeing none. Thank all three of you for being here. Any other public comment in the room on House Bill 76? Anyone online? Or no one? Seeing no further comment and widespread agreement between industry, the state, and apparently our legislators, we'll close public comment on House Bill 76. Anybody want to bring a motion? Moved by Representative McGuire, seconded by Representative Ayer. Any discussion or amendments? I believe Representative Duncan, do you want to present your amendment again? I'll let you get situated and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of you have received this amendment. It starts on page 2, line 8. We delete a single office. Then later along that line on line 8, we take proprietor, we delete that and we insert proprietorship. On the following line, line 9, after additional, we insert company and we delete for the. And then the next line, we delete office.
Moved by Duncan, seconded by LeBeau. Barb, I did just send you a copy of that over email if you already had it. Okay, discussion on the amendment. Seeing no discussion, question on the amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. That amendment is passed. Further discussion or amendment on House Bill 76. Representative Roscoe.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know really how the real estate office works, but is there a charge for this license that you have to have?
Do you, okay, go ahead, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's $300
Okay.
for a licensee. But the sole proprietor, they have the initial $300, but they could have up to 3 different types of business. So you could have property management, regular real estate, residential, or you could have commercial, or you could be a builder or something along those lines. Typically, If you have three different companies, you would have to have three different licenses. But as a sole proprietor and you're within one building, within one office, you don't have to have three different licenses. Now, if you had a different office building, a different brick and mortar, you would definitely have to have a separate license.
Ms. Zish, I may drag you back up here real quick. Sometimes that's a danger when legislators talk, questions get raised. So the question, administrative burden on the agency, is there administrative burden in processing three different licenses at the extreme? Or if it's in one sole proprietorship, do you process that together? I'm trying to figure out the reason they may be charging $300 for each one of these is there is a significant
Yes.
workload. Can you just
Yes,
go into that a
Mr.
bit?
Chairman. Yes. So there is a workload for each of them. That would be the same for any of the companies that we currently license. So anyone who is a corporation, an LLC, or a partnership also has to go through the same process where for any company that they have, whether they have one branch, two branches, or three branches, or some companies have 17 branches, then they will file paperwork for each of those branches and we process each branch separately. And so that's what the cost of that $300 is, to offset the work for us to process each application that they bring in. So for the sole proprietorships, we extended the exact same way that we would have treated any other LLC, corporation, or partnership. Is for each application we receive, we do it by application. So each company application would be $300.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nebraska.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there, are these renewed every year, every 2 years?
They are
Ms. Ish?
renewed at the end of the first year and then every 3 years subsequent to that. That's also one of the reasons that we held off enforcing it in 21, so that people could have it from the beginning of 22 and then have a longer time period before they had to renew again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion, committee, further amendments? Seeing none and someone calling question.
Question?
Question being called. Barbie, if you'd call the roll on House Bill 76.
Representative Blackburn, aye by absentee. Representative Clausen, he's absent. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air. Representative Burt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Zwanitzer. 8 ayes, 1 absent.
Can we mark Representative Clausen down as excused officially on the roll and not absent? Thanks. With that, you're going to floor manage the bill, Representative Duncan? Excellent. Next up, we have 2 bills from Management Audit. And the Chairman of Management Audit is here to present those. Doesn't matter which order we go in. House Bill 56, okay. The examination of books of certain districts and entities will be up first. Welcome Chairman Barlow to corporations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have 2 bills that actually come out of similar work. There were actually 5 bills. A couple of them went to the Senate. 3 came to the House. 1 I did not introduce. But these 2 did come to your committee. And I certainly will take them separately, but understand that they came out of some of the same issue. Management Audit Committee in the last several years has worked with our Department of Audit and the Auditor's Office to try to understand better how we have fiscal compliance with many of the entities and agencies which receive funding from the state of Wyoming. As you know, we have a uniform fiscal, I can't get all the words right, but anyway, the Uniform Fiscal Code that requires certain reporting through the Department of Audit, and they in turn notify the legislature, and the Management Audit Committee is the home committee for that component of the Department of Audit. So we get these as a matter of course, just like you would get things as a matter of course from the Secretary of State or from, some other entity that reports to your committee as a home committee. So in the last two years, I've been on management audit for 2 years, the preceding legislature, and now halfway through this legislature. We've been trying to understand better and have, better understanding of what the agency does, Department of Audit, Public Funds Division is what this comes from. And then our role in assisting them with ensuring compliance for these public entities. So the first bill, House Bill 56, and certainly their Department of Audit staff here, and Mr. Chairman, it's your pleasure. They certainly can join and were part of this discussion throughout the last several interims, actually. But the first one is really talking about the examination of books for certain entities. And what we've discovered is, and this actually came from a very specific issue out of Park County. There was a particular board, and this is actually page 6 of the bill, which was a recreation board that, if I remember correctly, they were basically defunct. They were not operating. There was no interest in continuing their operations. They were not filing audit reports. There was going to be none. Like I said, this is probably a year and a half ago, so my memory may be failing me, but there was no way for the actual board of county commissioners to dissolve them. And they were created by the Board of County Commissioners. So first we needed to address that. And as you'll see on that page, it's restoration districts. Well, we weren't actually dissolving the restoration district. We're actually taking care of the Board of Trustees appointed by the county commissioners in Title 18. So this led to, okay, well, how much non-compliance are we having with these audit reports? And these audit reports are annual reports, and they're part of making the cost of government report, et cetera. So they feed into larger pieces of what we want for accountability in government in the state of Wyoming at all levels. And so what this bill does is it basically brings in, and you'll see much of the bill is just conforming language about one particular thing, and that's 1612-202A. And 1612-202A, and I'm just going to start on page 2 of the bill and kind of just breeze through the bill, but you'll see this through, first of all, 164125C on line 10 of the bill. And this is, again, this is the director of the audit, requiring these institutions to file reports of the books. And you'll see that 164125C, and I have these bookmarked, but of course, when I need them, I can't find the bookmark. 25C, this is unincorporated towns, not subject to the Uniform Municipal Fiscal Procedures Act, and public entities receiving funds from those municipalities, from a municipality. And then the second one, and this is the one that's added throughout this statute, is 1612-202A, which also has an addition. And members of the committee, this is airport joint powers, cemetery district, conservation districts, fire protection districts, et cetera, museum districts. It's basically a very long list of both county boards, rural health care districts, recreation districts. Anyway, you can see the entire list, 1612A, which, as I mentioned on page 12, there is an amendment to change Romanet 12 XII to Board of Trustees pursuant to those recreation districts that a county may appoint. So that is much of what the bill does. It says, hey, not only are the districts under 164125 subject to this, but the agency, the Department of Audit, had some folks pushing back that they were not subject to these reporting requirements. And so they wanted some clarification. So that's why all of these other boards and sanitary improvement districts, senior citizen districts, et cetera, were brought in under this reporting requirement. As I said, this is to ensure transparency and the reporting requirements are being met. So that actually is what happens throughout the bill, is adding this 1612-202A, and then you'll see some more conforming type language, which is like on page 3, instead of each county, city, town, it's counties, cities, towns, special districts, and then it designates which types of special districts. And that goes on through many of the pages. Now, you're going to hear some concerns about shall certify. So the department is certifying to commissioners and to different entities that these requirements are being met. And then on page 16, we added some language which may give some folks some concern. And this has to do with the dissolution language of a special district or other entity. And I think the intent of the committee was not that this was going to be used as some, way to start getting rid of districts, but this is truly districts. And if you look back up on page 5, lines 11 and 12, this is districts or other entities that fail to refile the reported report on or before. I mean, they are not in compliance with the requirements of the department, of the statutory requirements, which then the department, promulgates rules on and gives timelines and advice and et cetera. So this is not a means of giving the county commissioners some carte blanche to start, going after districts. This is truly a failure of them to meet their obligations under the statute. And this is a bit of I guess maybe a stick, if you will, to say, get your affairs in order. So this is not, I've had members from my own community say, oh my gosh, every district's at risk. No, I don't believe they're at risk at all if they're in compliance with the reporting requirements. Because this dissolution language is very specific, fails to file the reported, the required report, et cetera, et cetera. And be clear, and the department will talk about this, there's previous timelines before this, before any action is taken. There's October 15th, there's timelines prior to this even occurring. So they're on notice long before we get to this point. It's not like this is something that comes out of the blue. You missed your postmark. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the bill. And of course, on line 6, there's a definition issue, for Title 35 and person in this context. What we're doing here, we just had to say recreation districts, and we changed that to Board of Trustees, just like we did in that definition up above. In that list of entities. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the first bill. And maybe Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I can just walk through the second bill and then you can take comment on both of them, or however you wish, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone in the committee have concerns? Chairman Barlow doing so? Sure, we can put both bills on the table, House Bill 56 and House Bill 60. And that way there's any public comment, they can address both or sing either bill, probably appropriate. So if that's okay, Chairman Barlow, go ahead and present House Bill 60 as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, this comes throughout the discussion we had in the, like I said, several interim process. This has to do with why are we having challenges with getting some entities to file their audit reports? And do they understand what the obligations are? And are the members of their boards, the responsible parties, understand their obligations under this? And so this is really it's a two-part bill. One is to make sure that there's training, if you will, to do this. And the second that is that they're not in compliance and they're not eligible to receive future grants. So we'll start with the second part first. So this is on page 2 of the bill. New language on lines 9 through 17. And you will note, so this is the existing language is if you're receiving these, you have an audit requirement. And then if you want to receive additional grants and loans, you have to be in compliance with the ones you've already received. To receive new grants and loans, you have to be in audit requirements compliance for the ones that you've already received. Can't be in arrears on your obligation to the state, and particularly to this issue. So this was actually there was a amendment right in our last meeting that specified that basically you better be in compliance before you got to be in compliance before you're eligible for anything else. So that's page 2, and I think to me that is the heart, or the most, I guess the incentive, if you will, or the stick to getting things done, because you're not eligible for another grant if you're not. Now this compliance is done, both the Department of Audit has a role in it because they're the ones that are being reported to, and then the state auditor has a role in it by saying, hey, okay, by not issuing checks, i.e. the grants or loans, they're a part of that too. So that it's a kind of a dual role, and certainly the department, and if there's auditor's offices represented here, they can talk about their experience up to now. And then you go to page 3 in the bill, and it talks about, withholding. This is where the state auditor comes in. If they're not in compliance, fail to comply, then they withhold. Once they become in compliance, then they are again in compliance and can receive these funds. And this is essentially what the bill does, the remainder of the bill does on the next couple pages. And then we get to page 5. And part of it is, and I should be more clear, part of it is on page 4, this is special districts and other entities going back to the previous bill, i.e. 16.4.125C, 16.12.202A. That's why there's a connection between the two bills. The first part talks state agencies and boards for county, city, and towns. The next one is special districts, i.e. Romanet 3, and that carries through to page 5, top of page 5. The bottom of page 5 talks about how we get our public officers trained to understand and be responsible to the requirements that we have. And to be clear, folks, we already have these requirements. What we want is compliance and training so that people will be in compliance. Not only that they know they have the responsibility, but they carry out the responsibility in a manner that is appropriate. So what this does is give the Department of Audit the ability to provide guidelines or actual training, or in lieu of this directly instructing public officers, this is on page 6, line 4, 5, 6, etc. They can approve courses that others may provide to these entities, to these officers. So it may be the Clerks Association or the Assessors Association or someone like that who has an interest in ensuring that this training is taking place, and they have standardized some courses, whether they're national courses or locally developed, and they are providing this. So through the Department of Audit, they can have them certified, if you will, or added to a list so that these members can be trained. So I'll just give you a brief example of my own experience. When I went onto the Wyoming Livestock Board, I was appointed for a 6-year term, and we had, I can't remember if it was a day and a half or 2 days of training on our responsibilities as a board. And one of those responsibilities was our fiduciary responsibility as a board, an independent board with our own budget and with our ability to appoint our own executive director, which in state government is pretty rare within itself. We had that, but local boards, districts, et cetera, they have far more latitude. They're either elected or appointed. Of course, cities, towns, and counties are certainly elected officials, but they often have treasurers or hired or appointed people do these type of things. So this puts a responsibility both on the officers and on those folks that may be responsible for those duties as well. But ultimately, it's on the officers to ensure that these things are being done correctly. So this language on page 6 and 7 is all about that. And I think probably one of the things to look at is on page 7, there's a definition of what a public officer is. And this goes to some of the discussion we've had about who's responsible. And so Romanet I is the folks responsible for handling the accounts. That might be someone who's hired or someone who has that responsibility outside of a appointed or elected member. And then Romanet 2, of course, is the members of the governing body who have that fiduciary responsibility innate because of their role on the body. So, and then sections 2 are just about, getting the training. You got to give some timeline for folks to get training, and then effective immediately. And the effective immediately is, I guess what all we're trying to get to with that is this is important. We wait till July 1st to make this effective. Those folks who are responsible for the reports this year, let's get them in the pipeline and get them up to speed sooner. So because these reports, like I say, start becoming due in October, November, and then you have that dissolution clause by December. So anyway, so we just felt like let's get this process moving a little faster. So Mr. Chairman, I think you can see the connection between the two because of the addition of the special districts. They're related to the same topic. Obviously, they're talking about two different things. One's bringing those special districts in, and we're making the requirement that to receive additional funds, they have to be in compliance. The second one is giving the auditor the ability to hold those funds back if they're not in compliance, and then release them when they come in compliance, and the training requirements. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to stand for questions, but there are people more qualified to answer them in the room than I am. Thank you.
Any immediate questions for Chairman Barlow? Not Representative McGuire? Maybe now? Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Barlow, for bringing this forward. I just wanted to ask, so we discussed this at some length a couple years ago with our favorite accountant, who's a member of the body, whom some would say is sick, but anyway, is not here today. But one of the questions that came up is there any kind of a safety valve? And I'm just looking through the statute right now, which I believe still contains the step down of different amounts and different categories of reports that'll satisfy based on the amount of, I would say gross, but it's based on the amount of dollars that are involved with that particular agency. And my question to you is there any kind of a safety valve? So part of the discussion we had before is very small agency that's out in a rural part of the state, and maybe they can't find, because the board that I serve on, in our town, there's only 2 accounting companies that will even consider doing these types of audits. It's not your, not single guy that's got a little office. It's pretty specialized stuff, and they have to have special insurance to do it. So I'm just curious, is there any kind of a safety valve for these very small agencies? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Barlow, if you want that, or I can turn it over to. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like I said, there are more qualified people in the room that will can address that. But yes, because there are different levels of audit requirements, some come down to basically show us your balance sheet, but you got to turn it in to be in compliance. And I think that, there are disconnects. And some of the disconnects we have are flat out, they got a post office box, nobody checks it but once every 2 months. So they don't find that they have an outstanding report. And, somebody says, oh, what do we got to do? To be clear, when we sent out letters, and we sent out letters as a management audit committee to, and I don't remember exactly, but probably a half a dozen or 10 different entities 2 years ago. I think after we, and it took some time to get back because they were very small entities. They were, a improvement district somewhere that just had, they just didn't know they had the requirement. So that's where the training comes in. That's where we're just letting them know they have this responsibility if they're going to use public funds or use taxpayer or funds that they've collected from, assessed on somebody and collected. So part of it is education. We don't want to actually dissolve any of these. We want them to actually be in compliance, understand their responsibilities, and take care of the business that they were assigned to do. But there are different levels of audit requirements, from a very large community, let's say, or a county that has the highest level because of the dollar amounts, et cetera, to very, I would say, rudimentary, basic, did you balance your checkbook type? Maybe that's a little bit, maybe that's not exactly it, but, and the Department of Audit, I think, also have some level of, I don't know if flexibility is the right word, but say, hey, what does meet the requirement here? Like I said, the Department of Audit is here. The new director of that division is here, or administrator of that division is here, and certainly can answer those questions with more detail, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any further questions for Chairman Barlow? I'll have him. Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaker Barlow, in 56, it refers to special districts throughout the language of that statute, and yet you say there are a lot of special districts claim that they were not subject to this. And so this is just, by the addition of the 6212-202A, you're just making that clear. Is that kind of the purpose of that?
Chairman Barlow.
Mr. Chairman, so actually a special district is a little different than the ones that come under the 202A. 202A are not special districts. Not all of them are special districts in the sense that they are put on a ballot and established by the voters. They're actually districts that may be, a library district is one example, that the Board of County Commissioners appoints a board to oversee the operations of the library, or the museum board. And there was discussion, and like I said, the Department of Audit can weigh in on this. There were some that said, hey, we're not subject to this because we're not actually explicitly named in the statutes. Special districts, and this committee is certainly the crossroads of special district stuff. I think that was more understood that if you establish a special district through the vote of the people and you elected members to that district, they were certainly subject, but I think it's the appointed boards who there was maybe less understanding about. That, and like I said, Mr. Chairman, there are experts in the room who can further flesh that, but that is at least my understanding when we took it up as a committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? All right. Thank you, Chairman Barlow. Stay around if you're able. Director Chavez, come on down. I think this is the first time you testifying to us in Corp since you've been named director 6 months ago, maybe? Now? You've been there? All right, congratulations. Welcome to Corp. You talk about both of these bills perhaps together and any effect it would have on your office.
All righty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just first to answer a couple.
And
of
I stated your
questions.
name, but if you'd state your name to the committee one more time.
Justin Chavez, Director of the Department of Audit. So the first question about different levels. So statute lays out based on the greater of revenues or expenditures, what additional oversight an entity is subject to beyond just submitting the census report. So the first report we get is the census report from cities, towns, counties, special districts, boards, and that's a basic financial report of revenues, expenditures, cash and investments. And then based on the greater of your revenues or expenditures, then there's additional oversight that is required. In terms of an audit, that's only required for special districts that have revenues or expenditures in excess of $1 million. So I'd say generally, you're not going to get small entities subject to that. You might have some, but that's the level for an audit, the most intensive level of additional oversight. Entities, special district, and I should clarify that hospital districts have to have an audit regardless, but I think all but one of those are in excess of $1 million in revenues and expenditures. If you're between $500,000 and $1 million, then you're required to get an audit review, which is substantially less than an audit. And then below 500,000, there's no audit requirement in terms of an independent CPA audit. Those entities fall under the Department of Audit's purview, and we will do audits of those entities. And then to Representative Ayers' question, in 56, I think that's largely clarifying who is subject to our reporting, and to clarify that really it's all special districts. We have had some pushback in terms of boards or some special districts in terms of whether or not they're subject to our reporting. And so I think that's just clarifying that the intent is that all special districts report their census report to us. In terms of impact to the department, I think we largely have the structure in place to implement what the bills are asking. We might have to make a few tweaks in terms of what we track in terms of training, but I think we can pretty much do that in-house with what we already do.
So one question I have, in the second bill, when we basically are directing you and the Department of Audit to provide, not to provide, but to establish minimum training requirements. In the sense of the bill, I get that these are online training courses, no additional staff or funding from the Department of Audit will be necessary to assist. It does seem like an interesting burden that you'll place on others that doesn't really necessarily come from you, but you'll find approved online training courses. You could walk through that for a little bit.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, online out of our office is one option that we've discussed. Similar to our website already has a training video that walks entities through filling out their budget that they're required to submit to us. We would anticipate doing something similar. In addition to that, I think the bill allows for the department to identify other trainings that are acceptable. You have other special district related entities that do provide training. A lot of times we're asked to provide some training at those meetings. And so I think that would be the other area where we would leverage training that already exists.
Just have one more on this list that you'll provide to the treasurer and auditor that you provide now. Is that a public list that goes, I mean, if it's going out to every county, city or town and we're notifying all state agencies and boards of every county, is that basically a public distribution list now, or are there any confidential requirements on it that a certain city is out of compliance? And how public or how privatized is that list now? And do you anticipate it staying that way with the increased kind of expansiveness of where it's going in this section?
Mr. Chairman, I would assume that that list is public. We send it to the statutorily required entities. So the special district that or city, town, whatever entity isn't in compliance, they get the letter. The oversight body gets the letter. The treasurer gets the letter. And then as far as overall compliance at the end of the year, we publish the list of entities that are not in compliance as of December 31. That's published on our website.
Other questions for the Director of Audit, Representative LeBeau?
Thank you, Chairman. Director Travis, I have a question in regards to the compliance of the minimum training requirements as well. On page 7, lines 3 and 4. So it's an either or. So if somebody's not in compliance, an oversight body could remove the public officer or provide increased oversight. And I'm just curious, what is provide increased oversight? What does that mean? What does that entail?
Mr. Chavez?
Mr. Chairman, Representative LeBeau, for our part, I don't know what the governing body would exercise in terms of increased compliance. I would assume that would be to require additional training.
Are there further questions? Representative McGuire?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just looking at pages 4 and 5 of the bill, which talks about subparagraph J, Romanet II, because we don't have the full statute in front of us. So we've got that portion of it where it goes on and talk about if there is non-compliance, shall file notice and shall move forward with dissolution. Do you anticipate that there will be, that will be used? How many do you have out there in the hopper that are not in compliance right now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire. So typically I'd say by December 31, we have single digit entities that aren't in compliance. And I'd say typically those are probably entities that have ceased operating, if you will. And so really those are entities that are no longer providing service and just have to go through the dissolution process. But law requires, as long as they're still an entity, that they would have to report to us. So single digits and usually entities that are already no longer operating.
Follow up, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is in the form of a question, because I was surprised when I looked at the penalty provision. And the penalty provision talks about willful in obstructing and willfully hindering. But I was surprised to see it's a felony for willful failure to comply. So was that surprising to you also when you read it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I'd say no. We have existing in the Department of Audit statute for as long as I can remember. There's been language in there that has made it a felony to not comply with Department of Audit requests. So I'd say probably not.
Further questions for the Department of Audit? Not seeing any at this time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other people wishing to public comment on House Bill 56 or House Bill 60, Mr. Winnie, and then Mr. Novotny. Welcome, Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Some comments. I am in a special district, and some years ago, I asked them if I could review their records. And they went through a series of shenanigans for a period of about 16 months before they finally opened their records. And then they only opened their records when a judge had ordered it. And so as you talk about things like financial reporting and so on and so forth, you need to make sure that those kind of things have some teeth in them. The other thing I would remark on with regard to your audit programs, several years ago, in front of the corporations committees, different personnel, so it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, I spoke up because they were struggling with then an embezzlement issue, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but the real issue was somebody was able to hide underneath the radar. And I had given them some thoughts that came out of my experience in the Navy nuclear propulsion program about how you make reviews of records, even though it not be a full-blown audit or something conducted by the Department of Audit. So for your small and even your medium districts, you need to get some eyes on it at a lower level than the financial burden that typically is involved. Lastly, I'd remark your comments about training for board members, I think very appropriate. Some years ago, I remarked in that regard with regard to school boards so that they would understand the ebb and flow of financial doings in a school district. And I think it's very important and perhaps important enough that you require it to be completed before they're sworn in. Subject to your questions, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Winnie? Not seeing it, Bill. Thank you. Mr. Novotny. Commissioner Novotny, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bill Novotny, Johnson County Commissioner, here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Tomorrow, when you meet with your commissioners, you will receive our bill review sheet, and you will notice on this bill that we have put it as a monitor. And Mr. Chairman, if I can direct your attention to page 2, starting on line
House Bill 56 or 60?
House Bill 56.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, starting on line 9, we believe that there was a drafting error in this. And actually, you've given us the authority to dissolve municipalities as well as special districts. And we do not believe that was your intention. We would, and I understand that Mr. McLaren with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities has an amendment to maybe possibly clean this up. Our feelings are a little bit different. We didn't present this in a written format for you because we didn't believe it was our job to make sure that we didn't have the authority to dissolve municipalities. So, Mr. Chairman, what I would advise you on line 9, if you would restore the and then delete the special districts. On line 10, after 16-4-125C, add a comma and insert special districts and other entities, delete that or, and then Mr. Chairman, if you would move to page 5, if you would delete the balance of 16 and that portion of 17 that was inserted, we believe you can remove the commissioner's ability to dissolve municipalities. We want to be clear that you will not find commissioners using this new authority, should you advance this bill, to willy-nilly go out and dissolve boards and commissions. However, most of the time we value our friends in the cities and towns, and we do not believe that you intended to give commissioners the additional authority of being able to dissolve municipalities. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Any chance you have that in writing, Mr. Novotny, or when the
Mr.
time comes, I just want to make sure I get it correctly. So if there's a win next 5 minutes, you could do that.
Mr. Chairman, I will do my best, or Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to give you my copy so you can see. I will give it to our good clerk, and I do apologize. We're in the middle of bill review right now, and so you got the junior varsity rather than the varsity here today.
So if we don't amend it, you'll change from monitor to support? Not sure yet.
Mr. Chairman, I am not going to answer that question.
Other questions to the County Commissioners Association about either of these bills? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Novotny.
I think it'd be kind of exciting.
Mr. McLaurin. Any thoughts on having the county commissioners dissolve municipalities? I do like how you think. Go ahead, Mr. McLaurin.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Bob McLaurin with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I appreciate Mr. Novotny's testimony. We agree. We don't think towns should be able to be dissolved by counties. We're creatures of the state, and only the state can dissolve them, in our opinion. We support the concept of both of the bills. I do have a small amendment that we think clarifies it, and it's basically, should I pass it out? House Bill 56.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Our amendment on page 4, line 6, after entities insert that receive funding from a municipality as, and the same insertion at page 4, line 15. This mirrors the definition 16.4.125C, and we believe that creates a clarity. I have not spoken to Mr. Novotny about his amendment. We're not opposed to that if that works better than this, but we're just would like to make sure that we clean up the confusion. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Wham? Not seeing any yet, but we will discuss the amendment at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Herman. Welcome to corporations. I'm intrigued to figure out who you're representing today. Go ahead.
That will quickly become clear, Mr. Chairman. Marguerite Herman here for the League of Women Voters. And I speak in favor of these two bills as good government bills, the classic, just as we did for other accountability measures for open meetings and public records. And I remember the discussion back then was a sort of complaint, or that there was a lack of capacity in governmental entities that fell under the statutes, that they didn't have the staff, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the money to hire people to do the books or to be the custodian of records and that sort of thing. So that would be my only concern. And the second bill, which does mention the training, takes care of that piece. And I just wonder if some of these smaller districts, all volunteer, part-time, if that's going to be an issue for them. I guess you could say that part of the grants that they're using might have a piece dedicated to the record keeping and the reporting. That's a separate thing. But I would just have to say it's a, and I noticed that there's no grace period built in as of July 1, that's it. And the penalties apply and that sort of thing, and that's appropriate. I just, I think that some people are still going to be caught off guard on July 2nd. And they'll say, what? And So I think a lot of this is making people aware of it, because I think the open meetings and public records laws, a lot of people had no idea that they fell, what their obligations were under statute. And that could be, maybe I'm giving too much leeway, but I think part of this is a lot of these small districts are part-time, they're volunteer, there's going to be a lot of education, not only how to, but that you must do. And so I would hope that they get that from the county commissioners or whoever they have to report to. But accountability for public funds and grants that are given to public entities is absolutely essential. And so we support it as a good government and accountability bill, and it'll bring a lot of people. It may surprise some people, but it apparently is time. So thank you.
Questions for the league, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned those very small districts that are volunteer, part-time, maybe no staff, no employees, they're volunteer board members. You concerned that as we put more and more burden on them, I agree they need to be held accountable, but it's tough to get people to fill some of these positions. Could this make it worse in recruiting people to volunteer for these kind of boards?
Well,
Ms.
Mr.
Herman,
Chairman,
thoughts?
I would have to say that that it's necessary. It may be difficult for some, but I don't see any alternative to a measure like this. And maybe it could be part of a county or a municipality's efforts to help them out with that support, with that capacity issue that some are going to have, maybe not many, but for those, it may become a factor in people saying, well, that's more than I bargained for. But I don't think we cannot do it. And it's a matter of giving them the resources, training, notice, capacity. So I think there's obligation on all parts to make this work, and it's accountability to the public. And so I don't think there's an alternative to it, frankly.
Further questions for the League of Women Voters? Seeing none at this time. Thanks, Marguerite. Mr. Kennedy. The wheat growers are excited by this bill. You may be representing somebody else today. Welcome to corporations.
Mr. Chairman, Keith Kennedy, I haven't had an opportunity to visit with you on behalf of the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. And I've been directed to oppose this 56, but I would like to point out the areas where we have some issues with this. First of all, as you heard earlier, conservation districts are creatures of the state, specifically the Board of Agriculture, not an individual county or county commissioners. And so that in our mind brings into question some of the later procedures regarding dissolution. Secondly, I would wonder where the enabling statute requires that these reports, very similar to what are done for Department of Audit, and forgive me, I don't know whether they also report to Department of Audit, but similar data is given to the Board of Agriculture and to the Director of the Department of Agriculture that goes in a report to the governor annually. So we would question duplication of reporting that's already required by statute. And with that, I would welcome your questions. And I did omit one thing. A couple of those other districts that are there are sub-creations of conservation districts, the water conservancy districts and watershed improvement districts. So I think a bit more time needs to be taken about how each of these boards may be created and specifically list ones that are created by the county in 1612-202A.
Questions for the conservation districts? They are creatures of the Department of Ag, and there are some standards and requirements that the Department of Ag has to do training and evaluation of conservation districts, and it is kind of separate accounting and working relationship, I know, internally between those two entities.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman, and very detailed, probably one of the longest existing training programs for their accounting system. And I think it's Also worthwhile to remember that they have a fairly substantial burden because many of their grants are also federal in nature. So there's also USDA reporting involved.
Seeing no further questions.
Thank
We'll
you.
take up those concerns at the appropriate time. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Other public comment. Looking the Southern taxpayers good, libertarians. Okay, no one on either bill, House Bill 60 or House Bill 56. Any public comment online? Seeing no further public comment, we will close public comment. Welcome back, Chairman Barlow. I know you heard several of those questions. Any of them you want to respond to at this time?
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I think the comment about dissolving municipalities, certainly that was not the intent of the committee as by the county commission, was not part of the intent. I think the cautionary, I would say, is the current statute on page, from page 2, page 3, requires the filing of the reports. I don't think we want to remove that language as may have been suggested. I think it's in the dissolution component, which is on page 4 into 5, J Romanet II or 2, where the dissolution comes in, that is appropriate to limit that to those entities. And I don't have Title 22 with me from page 5, line 15, because that is actually the dissolution if it even applies to any other entity besides. So I can't actually get that pulled up fast enough to see if that helps with the issue. The second issue about the recreation districts, and maybe this is, conservation districts, and I think I would argue that if they're in compliance now, then this shouldn't add any burden at all. Because I would believe, and certainly Director Chavez can respond to that the same reports that they're providing to the Department of Ag is probably what they're submitting to the Department of Audit. And if I'm mistaken in that, I certainly don't mind being corrected. But this is, and I think this is about entities receiving funds that are not in compliance. And like the director said, there's not that many. And a lot of times it's not because they're out of compliance. They're defunct basically. But we need some way of ensuring they get in compliance, because what I think the director said, it's by the end of the year, he only has single digits. But in October, November, there's more than single digits. There's a couple digits. And as they notify people and say, hey, come in compliance, that number goes down, 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 down until the end of the year. There's those ones that I think the director referred to, those ones that actually aren't operational and probably do need some level of dissolution and need some mechanism to do that. Granted, the county commissioners is not the way to dissolve cities or towns, excuse me. So that can be cleaned up, and I certainly have no problem with that. Fiscal training for small entities. I think if you have a fiduciary responsibility, whether it's for a checkbook or whether it's for a multi-million-dollar enterprise, I don't know that it's any different. It's just the matter of the scale. You still have a responsibility, and that's what you took up when you were either appointed to the board or elected to the board. As for the list of 202, that's an existing list. That's an existing list. If there needs to be more examination of which entities are on that list for what reason, but this is both elected boards, it's improvement. There's all kinds of different things that actually are created in different ways. Conservation districts is part of that list, and they have a unique creation statute potentially compared to others, but there's others in here that do as well. Rural healthcare districts, that's a vote of the people, not a executive branch type function, i.e. through the Department of Ag. So I just throw that out there, that there are numerous different ways that this list from 202 is dealt with. And that actually adds complexity, and maybe we took a too simple of approach and we need to step back. But I don't think that the audit requirements go away. They're still responsible for them. We're just trying to clarify who's responsible for them. We can also clarify that we do not need county commissioners dissolving towns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, seeing no public comment being closed, let's take up House Bill 56 first. Oh, sure, Mr. Chavez, if you'd come back. Let's move the bill first, if that's okay, committee. If anybody has a motion on House Bill 56. Moved by Duncan, seconded by LeBeau. All right, we're on House Bill 56, examination of books of certain districts and entities. Welcome back, Director Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just looking at the editor's notes at the end of the statutory language, and it appears in 2009 that there was a readjustment to get everybody on the same calendar. And then it says, or by rules and regs of the department. So at this point, are all of these agencies and everything, are they all on a calendar year or a fiscal year? Or do you allow reports to come in at different times? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, what they report to us is on a fiscal year, so July 1 through June 30 fiscal year. And then the census reports are due to us September 30.
Oh, sure. And that's the same for everybody then?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, yes.
Okay. And one last question. Do you think that we should put in some kind of a safety valve so that, again, July 1st, which will be pretty close to the requirement for these small agencies that maybe have fallen through the cracks or turnover or whatever, should we put a little safety valve in there? Give them a year or 18 months or something? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I think that's a policy decision for the legislature. I think the training requirement does include some language in there if there's time restraints or something along those lines, that the department can basically waive the training requirement.
Any other further questions while I got the director up right now? Okay, seeing none, but don't go too far just in case. Back to House Bill 56. I think there was an amendment from the County Commissioners Association. If anybody wants to offer that at this time, you'd be welcome to, or any other amendments. Moved by Representative Duncan. Second by Representative Roscoe. So the amendment for those watching at home, again, would be on page 2 to delete lines 9, the word special district and other, and then add the language on line 10 after the C, saying special districts and other entities specified in Wyoming Statute 1612-202A. And then additionally on page 5, deleting all of line 16 and line 17 through the period. Yes, Representative Duncan. Oh, and if I didn't mention it, page 2, line 9, reinserting the word the on line 9. That is the amendment before you, which ensures that county commissioners cannot dissolve municipalities. Question, no further discussion. All in favor of that amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. That amendment has passed. We're now back on House Bill 56. Any other discussion or amendments? Did Mr. McLaurin, did you have a separate amendment on?
He did.
Okay, would anyone, yes, that one. If anyone would like to move that at this time, moved by Representative Ayer. This would be the Wham amendment.
Second.
Seconded by Duncan. And for people at home, the amendment on page 4, line 6 of the bill, after the word entities, inserts which receive funding from a municipality as. And then again on page 4, line 15, after entity, which receives funding from a municipality. So they're on page 4 on line 6 and 15, just further delineating, you have to be receiving funding from municipality. Discussion on that amendment, committee.
Question.
Seeing no discussion and the question being called, all in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment is also passed. Further discussion on House Bill 56. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I try not to monkey with people's bills, but I would just encourage the bringer of this bill to maybe consider putting in some kind of a safety valve. I see that now that I look up, so I'll discuss that with him, but I mean, my mom did the books for years for a little volunteer fire department. And, you know, it's tough sometimes. So I think that we should give them some kind of a chance to come into compliance. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion, committee? Question. Seeing none and question being called, Barb, if you would call the roll on House Bill 56.
Representative Blackburn, aye by absentee. Clausen excused. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air. Representative Burt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Committee,
8 and 1 absent.
I'll
One
discuss
excused,
with the
sorry.
chairman of management audit. I assume he will be floor managing, but I will double check just in case. Let's go on to House Bill 60, fiscal training and enforcement of financial reporting laws. Moved by Representative Duncan, seconded by Representative LeBeau. We are now on House Bill 60. Apparently, there's an amendment with my name on it that got distributed. And when that happens, I find that it's usually a catch from LSO or the AG's office. And so if anybody wants to move the amendment, Representative Duncan moved it. Seconded by Representative Roscoe. This concerns page 7, or you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can. Page 7, line 8, after there, insert public. Page 7, line 10, delete members and insert for entities managed by a governing body, comma, members. Page 7, line 12, after there, insert public. And that's it.
And I think what the amendment does, committee, is really try the public, some of these special districts and other cities and counties, right? They have public funds and non-public funds. And so we're really concerned with these bills from Management Audit Committee on the public funds of their office. Further discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, question being called. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment has passed. Further discussion or amendments on House Bill 60? Seeing no further discussion, I don't believe there are any other amendments provided to us or that anyone's bringing. Question being called. Barb, if you'd call the roll on House Bill 60.
Representative Blackburn, aye by absentee ballot. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air. Representative Burt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Representative LeBeau. Chairman Zwanitzer. 8 ayes, 1 excused.
So that bill passes and I'll give it to the chairman of management audit to present on the floor as long as he wants it. As of right now, committee, I don't believe we have any other bills. The other 3 we're expecting, as you're aware, did not make the introductory vote. And I'm not sure if there will be more Senate files introduced tomorrow. But if there will be, I'll try to throw, an easier 1 or 2 up for Wednesday's discussion, just so we can get bills moving. So don't know what they are yet, but expect maybe a couple of our first Senate files Wednesday if introduced. And if not, I'll let you know tomorrow that we might not have Wednesday committee. With that, no other further business to come before us. Hi, Niobrara County. Welcome. Good to see you all. We will conclude.